Hey guys, Oscar here with Gastroenterology Simplified. I'm a board-certified physician assistant, and today I want to talk about something very, very important, something that I run into an issue with the patient and the patient's family almost on the daily basis. And my goal of this video is to actually answer a question, maybe help you decide what to do when the time comes. And today we are going to be discussing what is a PEG tube? What is it for? What is it used for? And I want you to have a conversation with your family members, your parents, your loved ones about this critical decision if you ever have to come to this decision of placing a PEG tube. I do place PEG tubes almost on the daily basis, and there's always a conversation with the patient's family, the patient's loved ones, the patient's significant other, and sometimes the patient does not have a family member to help make that decision. And sometimes the wishes of the patient does not align with the wishes of the patient's family, or vice versa. Sometimes their wishes do not align and we run into issues. But before we go any further, I want you to understand that this video is for educational purposes only. If you have any questions, concerns, or any type of questions when it comes to making this decision, always contact your primary care physician and your physician assistant or nurse practitioner. So let's go ahead and get the definition of what is a PEG tube? What is this tube for? What is it for? I mean, this tube looks so simple, but it does a lot, all right? So let's go ahead and get the definition here. A PEG tube is a feeding tube placed directly through the abdominal wall into the stomach. So we have that. This tube right here goes pretty much right here. It goes right here. And this is the way the patient will get feedings for at least 4 to 6 weeks while the patient gets stronger or maybe indefinite. So it's placed right here through the abdominal wall, so a tiny incision is made. Now, to be able to place this tube, you have to do it through an endoscopic procedure, also called an upper endoscopy or an EGD. The job of this tube right here, its job is to provide long-term access for nutrition, hydration, and medications when a person cannot safely eat or drink by mouth, right? So we have that clear, right? Now, what are some of the most common indications for a PEG tube placement? A PEG tube is generally considered when enteral feeding is expected to be needed for more than 4 to 6 weeks. So let's go ahead and make it simple. A PEG tube is indicated when the patient is expected to need enteral feeding, meaning a tube directly into the stomach for at least 4 to 6 weeks. And I'm going to see if I can show you guys. So it goes through the stomach, and this is how you would get feeding, just like this. All right. So what are some of the most common indications for a PEG tube placement? So the most common indications, we have a stroke with persistent dysphagia, meaning the patient cannot safely swallow because when the patient intends to swallow, the food goes into the lungs instead of the stomach. We have Parkinson's disease. We have advanced dementia. This is a very controversial topic. Once again, this is controversial, and the benefits should be carefully discussed. And the PEG tube could be also used for traumatic brain injury. Or the other conditions when the patient has head and neck conditions such as esophageal cancer, neck cancer, radiation-induced dysphagia, esophageal obstruction, when the esophagus, which is the food pipe, when the esophagus becomes completely obstructed, therefore the patient can't eat, because if the patient eats, then the food or fluids or protein drinks will go into the lungs. All right. A PEG tube could also be used for someone that has severe malnutrition, and the patient could eat some foods, but the nutrition is not optimal. So you could put this tube for a short period of time. Make sure you count the caloric intakes, and the patient will get feedings through the PEG tube in addition to orally. Also, another indication is for someone that has chronic aspiration risk, meaning that the food goes into the lungs instead of the food pipe. So those are some of the indications for the PEG tube. But as everything in life, there is an indication for a PEG tube, and they are contraindications or absolute contraindications for a PEG tube. So an absolute contraindication for a PEG tube placement are, and just to mention a few, uncorrectable coagulopathy, meaning that the patient has a very low platelet count or the patient easily bleeds. So that is an absolute contraindication. Hemodynamic instability, meaning the patient is not stable at all. So why would you put a PEG tube when the patient could die at any point? Active peritonitis, which is an infection of the peritoneal cavity. Bowel ischemia, severe sepsis, inability to safely access the stomach endoscopically. So let me explain this one to you real quick. To be able to put the PEG tube through the stomach, you have to use an EGD. The EGD has a light. That light, you can see the stomach once you're trying to put the PEG tube. Now, if the patient has a very large liver that goes on top of the stomach, or if the patient has the colon on top of the stomach, the transverse colon on top of the stomach, and if you try to make that incision, let's just say this is a sharp object, right? When you try to make that incision on the abdominal cavity, you could actually puncture the liver, the transverse colon, or any other organ that could be there. All right. We also have lack of safe abdominal puncture, just like previously mentioned. And when the patient completely refuses to have a PEG tube placement. So keep that in mind. That's why I want you to have a conversation with your family member. I want you to have a conversation with your kids in case this is an issue. For example, I ran into this maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, where the patient wrote somewhere that he wished not to have any other type of feeding if it's not through the mouth. In a way, when the patient was mentally there, he stated that he didn't want any type of PEG tube placement, any enteral feeding. He didn't want any type of feeding or nutritional assistance through the IVs. He didn't want none of that. But the patient did not sign the paperwork. He just wrote it down. So Those were the wishes of the patient. Now, the patient's family wanted the patient to have the peg tube feeding, wanted the patient to have some type of alternate nutritional access and nutritional assistance because the patient was not able to eat or tolerate any type of oral feedings, or the patient was at extreme. This patient specifically was at a very extreme risk for aspiration. So anything he would drink, it would go to the lungs. So the patient's family was wishing something, but the patient wished something else. So this is where it gets controversial. For example, in my case right here, I have always told my parents, what are your wishes for you if this comes to be an issue? I tell my parents, and I actually tell my parents about myself. What are my wishes when this comes to, if this is ever an issue, if I ever need some type of nutritional assistance? And this is why I need you to have, hopefully this could have answered some of the questions out there on what is a peg tube? What is a peg tube needed for? What is a peg tube intended to do? So in conclusion here, the peg tube is needed for an alternative or an alternate nutrition way for someone that will need some type of nutritional assistance for at least 4 to 6 weeks minimum. And this is indicated for long-term nutrition, hydration, and access to provide the patient with medications. When the patient is not able to eat or drink safely because the patient has some type of issues with the esophagus, esophageal malignancy, or esophageal stricture, or the patient has some type of neurological disorders, for example, a stroke, that the patient is not able to swallow properly because the liquids and the food would go to the wrong pipes. And there are indications on how to properly, or when it's indicated to put or place a peg tube. And there are absolute contraindications when the peg tube should be inserted. And once again, I run into this issue on the weekly basis. That's why I need you to have that conversation with your loved ones and tell your loved ones what are the wishes for yourself. Do I want this if it's going to be long term, or do I want this if it's going to be short term? Or do I need this if I'm mentally not there, if I'm not able to make any decisions? Do I really need this to extend my life? Or do I wish not to have anything and let nature take care of its course? Those are conversations that I want you to have with your loved ones, because at some point the patient has the complete ability to make decisions, and the decisions should be respected at all times. It should be respected. So my wish was to do this, but I don't want no one else to infringe on my wishes, because when I was mentally correct, this is what I wanted. And of course, before making any type of decisions, you have to educate yourself. You have to read about it. You have to talk to your primary care physician, talk to your physician assistant, talk to your gastroenterologist, talk to your palliative care physician. They have plenty of information out there for you to be educated. Lastly, if you found this video informative, helpful, don't forget to click like, subscribe, share the video, and do not forget to follow Gastroenterology Simplified, where we provide simple and clear medical education for you to understand the complexity of medicine in simple terms. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.